Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with jazz bassist Michael Blanco. Originally from San Diego, California, he went to school at North Texas University. He's promoting his 2016 CD, Spirit Forward, and he did it with cats like saxophonist John Ellis, the great pianist Kevin Hayes, and drummer Clarence Penn. So over his jazz life, he's made several international tours after being selected by the U.S. State Department. And he has been in the orchestras of over 30 Broadway shows, and he plays all over New York. He's got a great story, so dig this interview, my friends.
Thanks for taking some time out today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So before we get into what's going on with you in this new album, I just got to tell you, some of the best thinking and music experiences on the planet happen when you're driving in a car. And I've been really listening to your newest album, Spirit Forward, in the car. And what strikes me about this album is that it seems like it would be more appropriate for me to listen to on an airplane on the way to New York City. So just want to put that out there to you.
Nice.
Just like right as I get ready to go into the air and I know I'm going to New York, just put this on and go. But it's a great album. But before we get to the album, I want to talk to you just a little bit about what's going on lately in your world.
The album is the main thing I'm focusing on right now artistically, and I'm really excited about that. But I'm also playing in a few other groups around town. I play with a trumpeter named Jacob Barmis, and he has a great group with Danny Fox on piano and Christian Coleman on drums and Ocean Jewel on tenor saxophone. And I've been doing some gigs with a great saxophonist, Russ Nolan, here in New York, and a little bit of traveling with him. I'm also kind of in an interesting group with a singer-songwriter named Christo Radzewski, which he's a kind of a folk singer, but he's got some kind of avant-garde jazz musicians, like Mary Halverson and Toma Fujiwara are in the band, along with me, who is, kind of not really from that side of the jazz world, but it's kind of a nice combination. So those are some of the main projects besides my own. And then, of course, my group, my main focus, trying to get this album out to as many people as possible and, try to take it on the road.
So speaking of Spirit Forward, as I mentioned, it's a great album at the top. And what I'm interested in is when you make an album, the entire process is a long process. Talk to me about when you initially thought about this album, going to the studio, and now we're talking about it in a promo stage of your life. Just talk to me about the process.
Well, the process for this one, it kind of started when I was promoting my last one. I had a record a few years ago called No Time Like the Present, and I was doing gigs around town to kind of support that. I had a great band on that one, but certain gigs not everyone could make, so I would end up, calling different people to fill in. And that kind of in a roundabout way how I ended up with this band. So I had John Ellis was on the last record, and so he was making all the gigs with me. But one time we couldn't find my favorite drummers weren't available. And I was doing a gig with a great pianist, Adam Birnbaum, a trio gig, and he had just gotten off the road with Clarence Penn, and we were talking. And Adam was going to be on this upcoming gig with me. And I thought, why not call Clarence? He's always been one of my favorites, but I didn't actually know him. But I felt like I had this connection through Adam, so I decided to, what the hell, I'll reach out to him, let him hear some of the music and see what he says. So I did. He was down. He was interested in playing, so we got together, and he made that gig. And all of a sudden, like a door opened up musically. Like it just really took the music in a different place than I was expecting, but it was really exciting. So I was talking with John Ellis afterwards, and we're like, yeah, that was really cool. We should do some more of that. So I ended up, Clarence from that point became kind of the drummer, my go-to drummer for my group. And so I'm still doing gigs supporting the previous album. And then I had a sideman experience with a great vibes player named Anthony Smith. We had a gig that Kevin Hayes was on. And again, Kevin's one of my longtime heroes on piano. And we played with Anthony's band, and I'm thinking, wow, this is really cool. This could be a really good combination for what I'm thinking about writing with Clarence and now with John. So I got Kevin on a gig with the four of those guys that are on the album. And so now I'm along this line, I'm writing some new music. I always like to kind of keep writing and maybe debut a new piece on each gig if I can. we had this gig, and it kind of, again, it just like a door opened up, and I'm like, wow, this is really exciting. I really like where the music is going with these guys. So it was after that gig, it was, I guess that's almost a couple of years ago now, I decided, okay, I need to write a bunch of music for these guys in particular and do a record. So that's what I did. It took, I guess about a year on and off of writing, and playing. And then we went into the studio, went into Sear Sound, which is a great studio here in New York, with Chris Allen. He's a really fantastic engineer. Because I kind of figured at that point, I'm like, okay, I've got my dream band. I've got a bunch of new tunes I really feel strongly about, so I need to go to a good studio. And New Yorkers, there's so many studios here, and you can kind of, I've recorded so many of them, but I wanted to kind of do something really special, so I chose Sear Sound, and we went in and did the record in one day. Chris made it really easy. He's, really knows his stuff. Then, of course, you get through the mixing and the mastering and all that stuff that leads up to where we are now. The album's coming out on October 7th on Brooklyn Jazz Underground Records. And here we are.
Right on. So let me ask you this. Where were you born and raised?
Oh, I was born and raised in San Diego, California.
Wow.
So I'm on the opposite coast of where I was born and raised.
Let's say that's the American paradise.
Yeah, oh my God, it really is. And it's funny, when I was growing up, people always say, oh man, you're so lucky. So people would visit and say, you're so lucky to live there. And I would kind of get it, but I didn't totally understand how lucky I was until I left. As far as like the weather and, the scenery, you can do outdoor stuff all year long. But there's actually kind of a cool jazz scene. I mean, it's little, but there was a cool scene, some really good players when I was growing up. And I actually got to hear, when I was in high school, I went to a performing arts high school there. I got to hear, there was this club called the Horton Grand. It's like this club in a hotel. They would bring in touring people. So I got to hear Joe Henderson's trio with Al Foster and George Mraz 2 nights in a row. I remember sitting right in the front row and soaking it all in. And I got to hear Ray Brown there, which was a real life-changing experience. I remember I had kind of a funny, I was like a dorky kid, and I was so passionate about music, and so I see Ray Brown play. I go up to him afterwards, Mr. Brown, I'm a bass player, do you have any advice for me? And he just, he was just come off the bandstand. He wasn't probably really in the mood to talk, and he's like, what you need to do is practice 8 hours a day, every day. And I was kind of shocked by that. So I was like, is that what you do? He said, no, but that's what I did. That's what you have to do. So,
that's cool.
Which is, he kind of was like, that will clear up any problems that you may have. Obviously, I think if you practice that much and you don't know what you're doing, you could actually probably create new problems. But
right.
But the idea was true, and just like the kind of hearing about that kind of dedication to the music was really inspiring. And obviously hearing him play like at a pretty formative age, just the way it's one thing to hear a record, but to see a master like that play live and the way they approach the instrument, it was really totally inspirational and really shaped kind of the way I approach the bass.
So what other albums did you listen to growing up that were really huge for you that kind of helped open the doors for not only jazz but for bass?
Oh, well, the main one in jazz, well, it was really a compilation, actually, of Miles Davis. It was called The Essence of Miles Davis. But it basically had a lot of material from kind of Blue, but it also had Round Midnight from the Round Midnight album. So it's kind of that 50s, mainly that 50s, early 60s period of Miles with Paul Chambers. So Paul Chambers and Miles, but Paul Chambers was my first love on bass because I heard that sound. The first track on that record is So What, just like it is on Kind of Blue. I remember hearing that and being like, wow. I didn't even play acoustic bass at the time. I was playing electric bass and thinking, that's it. That's what I want to do. That's for me, that sound. And the combination of, I just love Miles' music and how lyrical it is and how like emotionally, it just grabbed me on an emotional level more than anything else. And that really appealed to me. So kind of from that, of course I got Kind of Blue because I heard that's what most of the songs were from that I liked on that compilation. I kind of basically checked out, this is like when I'm in high school, I checked out all the 50s and 60s Miles, and then I started checking out basically everyone who played with him which is kind of, a lot of people. You got Coltrane and Bill Evans and Herbie Hancock and, all these people, and then checking out their projects. So it kind of led me down a lot of different roads. And I around the same time, I heard Chick Corea with Miles, but also he had an album called The Acoustic Band, which is it's kind of its time a little bit, but I really fell in love with John Patitucci's playing on that too, and I was really blown away after hearing like more foundational players like Ray Brown and Paul Chambers, to hear what John was doing like with his melodic soloistic playing. I thought that was really inspiring too. And of course Chick's tunes and his arrangements are really cool. So I guess I've always been, I think it's the Miles influence, I've always been drawn to jazz that's kind of real emotional and tuneful on some level, that like, it can be abstract too and be adventurous, but it also has always has an emotional core. That's kind of what really still draws me to things.
So did you know early on that you were going to pursue a music career, or did that just kind of happen?
I did. I mean, it's funny. I don't even come from a musical family. I was always really drawn to music. And then by the time I started playing, like in junior high, I kind of took to it pretty quickly and went to a performing arts high school. And then when I started playing jazz, I kind of, we've been talking about, discovering Miles and all that stuff. Kind of right around that time, I kind of knew this was it for me. Like, this is what I wanted to be doing with my life. And, I totally, of course, no one really knows what that entails when you're that age, but I knew that I was passionate about it. And there was a good support network in San Diego. I had a great teacher named Gunnar Biggs, just like a really swinging bass player and really encouraging. And he also turned me on to another local bass player there named Bob Magnuson, who was kind of like a local legend. He had played with Sarah Vaughan and Buddy Rich, and so I got to study with both those guys. And they were really encouraging. Also, I could see their lives and how they were professional musicians, and they had pretty normal lives, but got to play great music all the time. It seemed pretty appealing. So I kind of knew, I ended up studying music in college. I went to the University of North Texas and studied jazz there. So then I was surrounded by a bunch of really serious students and a great faculty, but it's really all these intense young people studying the music and wanting to kind of make it their life's work was, I knew I was in the right place. It was really inspiring.
So then you move on, and you played with a lot of heavy hitters, John Hirabagan, Will Vinson. The list goes on and on, even, Kevin Hayes. What have you learned from the veterans about approaching music and, recording and being on stage?
So many things. I mean, well, definitely being on stage with them, first of all, the level of focus and intensity that all the guys at that level have when they play. They kind of, most of them are very relaxed, but it's just this intensity that you can tell there's never a moment of not caring. There's never a moment of not being serious about what they're doing. And one kind of fun thing about New York is sometimes you'll even be on a gig like in a bar or something that's like, not really a listening concert kind of gig. But people here are just so intense, like they always want to play their best, and they're always kind of bringing their A game. So playing with even guys like that in a situation that might not be, the Village Vanguard or something, you still see that they bring that same level of focus. So that's a really inspiring thing. As far as recording, just definitely little tips. Guys who are more experienced recording, I guess you get a sense of how I just observe like how they act in the studio, how they deal with getting a good headphone mix, and how they deal with, do they want to listen to a lot of playbacks, or do they want to just do takes and play straight through the session? And there's different approaches, and they're all valid in their own way, but stuff like that. And I think really the cool thing about playing with people like that is that, they're not holding your hand musically. They're playing the way they play, and it's up to you to kind of rise to their level as much as you can to try to make good music. And, they don't do that in a competitive way. It's just these guys are playing music at a really high level, and that's just the way they hear it. So it's, playing with them, definitely on this record, playing with Clarence and Kevin and John, there's just no choice. You have to jump right in there and, play with real commitment, really go for it. I think that's the thing that all the top guys have, is that kind of commitment to when they play something, they mean it. They're not, they're not guessing. They're serious about. They really have intention behind everything they're doing.
So let me ask you this: you've been twice via the U.S. State Department, an artistic representative for the U.S. You went to South America, Central America, and the Caribbean at one point, and then you went to the Middle East. Those experiences have to be incredible to be able to do that.
Absolutely. They were totally transformative, especially the Middle East trip happened in 2008, and the highlight, it was with a great band. It was a band led by guitarist Nick Dimopoulos with David Cook on piano and Tomo Fujiwara on drums. And we went to 5 countries, but the highlight, we went to Yemen at a time when, there was already plenty of strife happening there, but we got to go in right before things really took a more bad political turn that it might not be. I don't know if the State Department would send us there at the moment, but we got to go and meet like the warmest, most incredible people. And also part of those trips, they're kind of billed as cultural exchange. So we go and we were telling, kind of spreading the gospel of jazz, if you will, but also hearing local musicians play their traditional music. And I remember in Yemen too, we heard this, I don't even remember the name of this traditional instrument this guy was playing, but this guy showed up and it was like we were hearing the John Coltrane of this instrument. It was like the heaviest thing, something, a style that we didn't know anything about. It was totally foreign to our ears, but we could tell like how deep it was. So things like that are really inspiring and moving. And it kind of goes back to a little bit what I was saying about, guys like Kevin Hayes or Dinah McCaslin. It's that same level of focus that this guy in Yemen had, that, okay, this is a guy dealing on a high level, very serious about his tradition. And, so that is great. And then, of course, just traveling to places, when I went to South America, we got to go to Nicaragua and Uruguay and El Salvador and Panama, a bunch of places that I hadn't traveled before. Just meeting people, playing for different audiences, seeing how they respond to what you're doing. I've always been kind of interested in like how to reach an audience by, I don't necessarily want to change the way I play, but like how does what you play affect an audience and how do they feel about it? What can you do to get your feeling across to them more effectively? So those tours were really good for kind of, something, you play in New York or, I play in California, you get a certain sense of what is going to work. But then you travel out in the world and you see something else. I remember when we were in the Middle East, there's a great Billy Strayhorn tune I love called Isfahan that we, from the Far East Suite with Duke Ellington, that is named after a city in Iran. And we were on a tour stop in Bahrain, different country, but there was like a kind of a Persian population with some roots in Iran. So we were doing this gig for them, and we were like, oh, let's play Isfahan. They're going to love it. And so we explained, this is a song, it's named after this city, Isfahan, by Billy Strayhorn, Duke Ellington, blah, blah. We played the song, and I think we did a good performance of it. But afterwards, the crowd is like, that sounds nothing like Isfahan. That just sounds like Western music. And we're like, well, yeah, Duke Ellington and Billy, they visited, and this was their impression, and they were not buying it. They're like, no, that does not sound, that's not Isfahan. So it's kind of instructive. So yeah. I think if I were to write a suite of music like Duke did inspired by my travels, like you just have to be honest. It's like an American's view of traveling in these places and how what I felt, but you're never gonna it's not like gonna be their authentic cultural experience because we just all come from different places.
Yeah, absolutely. We have our own interpretation. So let me ask you this: you've been in the orchestra for over 30 Broadway shows. How did that begin, and why do you like doing Broadway so much?
Well, it kind of began, I guess, I went to a performing arts high school in San Diego that had theater and dance and music. And one thing they did was put on musical productions of Broadway-type musical shows because there was a way for them to get all the students, you had the musicians, the actors, the singers, the dancers could all be a part of this thing. So I did that in high school, and it was a lot of fun. but I never really thought that would kind of lead anywhere. But then when I moved to New York, I was actually roommates with Alan Ferber, a great trombone player, and his twin brother Mark. We were, who's a great drummer. We were roommates in Brooklyn, and we had a neighbor who was a great bass player named Marianne McSweeney, and she was playing on Broadway, and we got to know each other through, jazz and playing bass. And one day she needed a sub for something and sent me on it. It wasn't a show on Broadway, but it was kind of like people in that world. And it went well, so she started sending me on more things. And eventually I started subbing for her on a show she was doing. And I just kind of took to it because in college I studied classical music as well as jazz. And I also, I moved to New York, I played in a few rock bands and, kind of the normal stuff, playing, different styles. One thing I like about the Broadway experience, depending on what show you're doing, is you get to cover a lot of musical territory in one gig. So I'll play acoustic bass with the bow, play, classical style, and then maybe I'll have to play some kind of swing feel, and maybe I'll pick up an electric bass and play a pop ballad or something, all in the same gig. So I find that kind of appealing, and it's kind of like it challenges a different part of my musical brain, I guess you would say. With my jazz, and especially my writing, it's all about my creative outlet and what I want to create and put out to the world. But with the Broadway side of things, it's kind of more the craftsmanship of being a good musician. And I find something about that satisfying, too. Because it's like, how well can you do this task, play what's put in front of you. And, of course, here in New York, there's so many great musicians all over the place. But in Broadway pits, you'll find a lot of really great orchestral classical players. You'll also find some really great rock players and great jazz players. So I get to kind of cheat in a way and play. I played with some of the best classical players I've ever played with in my life in Broadway pits that they probably wouldn't be caught dead with me playing in an orchestra, but I get to, like a symphonic orchestra, but I get to play with them in this setting, which is, really gratifying.
Absolutely. So, at this point in your career, if someone was to say, summarize what's gone on up to this point, where you're at as a musician, how would you kind of look back on your career and summarize things?
Wow, that's a big question, but, well, I would say, I started as a student and kind of tried to soak up as much good music as I could. Moved to New York and got challenged and exposed to a really high level of playing. Meanwhile, always being composing, even from a young age. So kind of decided to put out a project of music and then saw how gratifying that was to put my own music out into the world and have people respond to it. So now I'm on record number 3 with my own compositions. I think I kind of have a split, I've arrived at a level where I have kind of a split career where I have, I'm a band leader and a composer who puts my own music out there. But then on the other hand, I'm a sideman in other groups. And even a third part, I'm a Broadway musician and a, recording musician who covers lots of different styles. So I guess it's kind of a little bit of a mix between things, but I think it's kind of a healthy balance between different parts of my musical personality. So I would say, when I think when I was young, I think the idea was like, oh, okay, I'm going to play with Chick Corea and tour the world. And that is still totally something I'd be open to. Chick, if you're listening, give me a call. But,
right on.
but it's like, then you things happen and you kind of, I think so many of my peers now are just kind of working on their own projects. That seems to be what is happening in New York more than anything at the moment. People are writing music and kind of creating opportunities for themselves. Some people have like these kind of nonprofit organizations where they present concerts, and there's a couple in Brooklyn and that are really cool. And so, yeah, I think I'm part of that community of people who are, making something, trying to make something happen and put their music out into the world.
So you had mentioned some really big shows that you saw in San Diego, and I'm sure you've seen a lot in New York. But let me ask you on a nostalgic route here. If you were to get into the Jazz DeLorean and you could go anywhere and see anybody at any point in time in history for jazz, where are you going to go and who are you going to see?
That's a great question. I think it'd have to go back to the beginning for me. I would have to see the kind of Blue era Miles group with Coltrane and Bill Evans, Cannonball, that group. I don't know where I would be seeing. Probably somewhere in New York. I'm trying to think of where I forget the name of the club that they used to play at a lot. I feel like Miles talks about it in his autobiography. But that would be the band I would see for sure. So I guess, 58, 59, Miles with Coltrane and Bill Evans in the band. That would be number one. I mean, of course, I was joking with some people about this kind of concept the other day because, all of us, living in New York now, of course, we've listened to, kind of the whole history of the music or, a good part of it. So I like to think, wouldn't it be great to go back in the time machine and play, like sit in, and then you could play with Charlie Parker and he'd be like, man, I like what you're doing. Little does he know that you stole it all from him,
Yeah.
It would be great, to do that or just, I'd also love to see the kind of 52nd Street era that you hear about when there's all like Charlie Parker's one place and Oscar Pettiford is one place and like all these guys are on the same block. That would be really cool.
Yeah, that would be cool. Why do you love jazz?
Well, mainly it's the emotional connection I felt with it when I first heard it. It just really grabbed me in a way. I think maybe because there are no words, it just it grabs me in a way that it's hard to put into words, but on a real deep emotional level. And then secondly, from that, as an instrumentalist, it gives you a chance to really express yourself in a personal way and gives you a lot of freedom, which I find really appealing. But it kind of, people talk about jazz being abstract or academic or whatever, but for me, it all really comes back to the emotional connection, and that's what I still feel with my favorite jazz, and that's definitely what I'm trying to put out there into the world.
Speaking of putting things out into the world, what would you say is one of the nicest compliments you've ever received from a fan?
Oh, wow. One of the coolest things that happened on a gig that I can remember recently was a few years ago, when I was promoting my previous record, a fan from Japan came up to me and he actually requested a tune from my first record that we hadn't planned on playing that night, but he not only did he request it, he sang it to me. He sang part of the melody. So there's someone I didn't, he wasn't, he was visiting, and that was kind of the coolest thing. I think one of the coolest things that's happened, just knowing that my music was reaching some people. And I was kind of bummed actually because I didn't even have the chart to pass out to the guys to play. So we didn't get to play it for him, unfortunately. So I owe him one, but I think that probably stands out, stuff like that. I'm sure there's a lot of other things too, but there's nothing like as a composer, especially hearing someone come up and sing one of your tunes to you and request it. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone has a version of who you are, your family, your friends, business associates, those that are in the crowd that you play for. But who do you think you are? When you wake up and face the world, who are you?
Wow, I like you've got these like deep existential questions here. I think I'm someone who, well, first, I'm kind of a fan of music. I love music, and I always want to learn about it. And I guess I kind of want to learn about everything. So I'm a curious person who is always just trying to learn something new. I kind of enjoy life. I don't know if I see myself differently than anyone else does. I guess you'd have to interview a bunch of people, but one thing I think that is a little different than some of my peers is just like I just still get so excited about going to hear things all the time, and I never kind of have lost the childlike sense of excitement for hearing great things. I get some of my colleagues who, you get so busy gigging, they don't want to go hear stuff on their night off. And I'm just still, people tease me because, I have one night off and I'll go to the opera. I go a lot, or I'll go to a jazz club. Sometimes I'll do both in one night, and it's so fun. So I guess, kind of like a fan and of music and a student of life would be how I would sum it up.
Very cool. Let me ask you this. This is my final question, and I'm always very curious because, you're in New York, you're in the cultural jazz hub of the world. What is the health and vitality of jazz? I can say from the Kansas City scene, things are going really well. There's a lot of clubs, there's a lot of musicians, Bobby Watson's at UMKC. churning out a lot of great musicians. But if you look at jazz as an active participant in jazz, how healthy is it in 2016?
Oh, I think it's very, very healthy as an art form. I think, it's always had, commercially, it sometimes can struggle, and I think that's always had that, and perhaps always will to a certain extent, because I guess to some people who aren't fans, it can seem too abstract to them. They don't know how to get into it as, since instrumental music. But there's just, as far as the art itself, there's so many great people playing, so many different generations playing in New York right now. One thing cool about kind of like lifespans becoming longer is we still have, some masters who are around from several generations previously, and they're kind of intermingling with younger players and playing. And we've got these really young jazz students, fresh out of high school, coming to the city to study. And it's a great mix. I think it's really vibrant. And I think the level of playing overall has gone up and gotten really high. It's an exciting time. And definitely for anyone who likes to write music like myself, it's an exciting time because whatever you write, you can find the right people to play it and who are going to make it sound great. And so I think that's inspiring a lot of people to compose and put groups together. So I think that's a healthy thing for the vibrancy of the scene. You mentioned the scene in Kansas City. I just remember that a great saxophonist, Matt Otto, I think lives there now, who I used to play with in New York. Come down. We had some fun times playing here. We used to play at a pretty shady bar where some shady dealings were going down while we played jazz. I don't know why they decided to have a jazz band there, but yeah, we had some great times
That's
playing
cool.
with Matt.
Well, it seems like he kind of did what you've done. He's been in LA and New York, and then, he eventually came here to Kansas City, but he's been on both coasts as well. So that's a high note to kind of end everything on. Michael, thank you. Good luck with Spirit Forward. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Michael for his time and all that music. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or go to YouTube and type in Neon Jazz. And you can always visit the neonjazz.blogspot.com for all things Neon Jazz. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.